what I want to talk about is the way we think about the economy. I was on a panel earlier today when we were talking about a mismatch in supply and demand in skills and the job market. And one thing that I would observe is that if you think about the labor market as demand by employers and supply by individuals, there's a couple problems with that, the most obvious of which is that employers are not actually paying the institutions that create the human capital that we work with, the schools and so forth. So that's one problem. The bigger problem, though, is that the individuals actually aren't people who just want money and have to work in order to do it. They want jobs. They want meaningful work. So meaningful work is part of what is most important to an individual, and therefore it's more demand. So I want to talk about how we move from this demand-supply sort of economy where people are more commodities in the labor market to a demand-demand economy that uses some of what we know about movements, about standards, and about marketplaces to actually put the ingenuity of this country to be a wind at the back of individuals as well as employers. So what would that look like? So first of all, that's me. Secondly, a couple things. This notion of a skills gap, I think most people who've thought about this for a little bit think that we have a gap in skills, and we do, but one of the things I want to show you is that the gap in skills comes mainly from a market failure, that, in other words, if you don't know what skills are needed, it's pretty hard to go out and get them. And if the skills that you're told you need for this job, you were also told you had to have acquired those skills 10 years ago, it actually is a very hard thing to do without a time machine, which we don't have. And secondly, the inefficiency of the job market. This question is, how many of you have ever applied for a job and never heard from an employer again? Well, for half the people in this country, that is a very common occurrence. I mean, you can apply hundreds of times, hundreds of jobs, and really learn nothing. You get no feedback. You're not any better positioned than you were. And third, how many of you knew how to launch your career, how to get your foot in the door? And my guess is that most of you did know something about that and were helped, because it's my observation that really no one gets to where they want to go in this incredibly complex economy without help. But the question is, who gets that help and who doesn't? So there is a lot of fear right now about artificial intelligence, robots, how you will. So this question of what are we afraid of, is it the technology that we should be afraid of? Or is it what it will do to our society? So like the legitimate things people are worried about are that if we keep the status quo of our kind of institutions, that these technologies are just going to move much faster than we can adjust. So the idea that there's not more work to do and robots are going to take all the jobs, I personally think is a silly idea as such. In other words, work is solving problems. And the last time I checked, we're not running out of problems, right? Work is solving problems, work is caring for people, work is inventing, work is fixing, a lot of things. However, I think it is true that our institutions are not necessarily able to keep up. So I want to tell you a story about my own family, and one of the reasons this whole idea that technology is going to take everyone's jobs doesn't resonate with me is that my own father in 1970 quit his job as a shipping clerk in a kosher food company and answered this ad that said, hey, learn COBOL. COBOL. He didn't know what that thing was, but they said you could write your own ticket if you learned it. So it turns out it's an IBM language for the IBM mainframes. It was in huge demand. They hadn't been teaching it in colleges. And they were so desperate for people who would do this, they would entrepreneurs would step up and train them, and if you could do it, you could get a job. So my dad did that. Turned out he was good at it. There was no reason to believe he would be. I mean, he had never worked in an office before. He dropped out of college after a year. But it turns out he was actually quite good at it. And then, to the point of everyone needs a hand, my mother had a job in Detroit Edison, and she got him an interview, even though he didn't have, kind of much background. And he could do the job. He got the job. And that was the story of my family's path into the US middle class. So what about now? What's really happening here? The argument that you need to understand if you're going to really fix this problem is, first of all, the problem is not the technology. The problem is our institutions. Institutions of the labor market, institutions of human capital development. And there are three main problems. The first is that everything in our system favors selection over investment. So in other words, at the college level, it's all about selecting. I mean, the signal of prestige is all about how selective is your class. At the company level, no matter how much a company, an individual company might think, boy, you know, if I kind of invested in our high schools or whatever, maybe I'd get some of them. The fact is, yeah, they would get some benefit, so would everybody else, and the benefit to them would be really dissipated. Whereas if you take that, just find new ways of screening, better ways of poaching, you're going to do much better. And by the way, that's exactly what's happening. All the investment in this space is in screening, selection, poaching. But secondly, quality as the signal, and it's related to selection. Selectivity as an indicator of quality requires exclusion. Exclusion is not an incidental feature of a system that is drawn off selectivity. It's the necessary feature. Just to preview, a system that actually signaled quality by a demonstration of your actual work, that's something that there's no inherent limit to how many people can meet that standard. But there is a limit to how many people can be top 10%, right? Or how many people can go to Harvard. So, and the final thing is, this entire thing is living in a system where there's massive investment in optimizing returns on invested capital, the capital that a company can own, their patents, their software, their property, plant, and equipment. There's about $40 trillion in the United States, and we have for 30 years, consultants, technologists, private equity, activist investors turning the crank to maximize return on invested capital. So it's about $40 trillion. It turns out that the human capital stock of the United States is worth somewhere between $150 and $200 trillion, so 4 to 5 times as much. But the way we optimize that is you say, hey, Joey, you ought to talk to your Uncle Rick because he had a friend who used to work there. Maybe he can tell you more about it. Okay, that's our optimization process for the labor market, and that's the fundamental reason why we're not making as much progress as we'd like. And here you have it. There's probably 80 million people by our calculation that really is overlooked in the sense that they don't have an effective way. They learn something new, they master something, they don't have an effective way of actually turning that into earnings, turning that into progress in the labor market. There's all sorts of people, just 40 million alone who went to college, didn't graduate, but lots of folks coming back into the labor market, people who aren't in school, and the like. And so you get people now like Leshawna Lewis, who grew up in East St. Louis, and got interested in computers. Like, she saw them, she heard about it. Like, the head of the computer club said, oh, come join. She was the only girl. She loved it. She went to college, technical college, for a year. Her mom got sick. She had to come home. But she figured, hey, I know how to do this stuff. I'll get a job anyway. For 10 years, she tried to get a job in the field. She couldn't get it. Like, she was a bus driver for a school that actually had a computer class, and she would substitute for the computer teacher. And when the computer teacher finally left, she applied for that job, and they told her she couldn't. They couldn't consider her because she didn't have a bachelor's degree, even though she had been doing the job successfully to rave reviews, right? It wasn't until she got into a demand-to-demand inclusive hiring marketplace like we've been creating that it worked. And I think you guys know who Alexander Hamilton is. And the reason I put him there is because he was someone who, he was a poor orphan in the Caribbean who wrote a letter to a newspaper, like a 20-page letter describing this big storm. And the grandees of the town said, you know what, this kid's got talent, and we ought to send him to, they got him a scholarship to Columbia, all that stuff. The point is he had a chance to show what he can do. And I'm not gonna waste my shot, right, is the song. He got a shot, though. He got a shot. People need to get a shot. Okay, so our goal, is proof of concept, demand, is within 10 years, we want to put 1 million, I should say, we want to empower, we want to enable, we want to clear away the barriers for 1 million Americans overlooked right now to actually work, learn, and earn to their full potential. That'll be about $20,000 additional income per year in that change, so about $20 billion a year of additional earnings for those people. So, how to do it. So what do they need? So job seekers absolutely need the signals. They need to know how to get a job they desire. And by the way, they may not know what job they should desire. They know very little. There's hundreds of jobs. The average person knows about 8 or 10 of them. So the odds that they're actually going to know what job they should be looking for are very slim. But then also, how do they get there? And then finally, and in my view most important, to the market point, you need employers willing to hire, willing to consider them for those jobs. And they need tools, and we'll talk more about how we do these tools. But the tools are both how to learn, and there's a lot of infrastructure around that, old and new, coding boot camps, MOOCs, and the like, community colleges. But they also need tools to signal that they are worth considering. We talk about this as validated hiring, because there's 3 ways people get hired. One is through your pedigree in some way, either academic or professional. You've worked for a company that, if you worked for Amazon, let's say, you must be pretty good. Or by recommendation by someone who knows you and has worked with you and can vouch for you, that the person hiring holds in respect. Or the third is just having a chance to show it. Just by some chance, you kind of get in the room, maybe you went to the wrong room, and here's your audition, and you just nail it, right? What we're doing is to allow that experience of showing what you can do to be available to all Americans at scale, right, for skilled jobs. That's the heart of it. So what does it do? I mean, we talked about the value of this inclusive hiring marketplace. We think it's really critical to be able to hire. Skill is one way to talk about it, but demonstration is the main thing, the main concept. You've got to be able to show it, and there's got to be an efficient way for you to show it. Now, it's very understandable that for a company, if 3,000 people apply for your job, you can't ever give everyone an audition. You've got to screen it in some way. But since since 1,000 people applying for your job are each applying for 500 jobs, in fact, if you had a utility, if you had a place where anyone who doesn't have the pedigree could go and show what they can do, all employers can use it. And we have 1,400 employers signed up so far. So if they're applying for 500 jobs, we can spend 10 times as much energy, effort, time as an employer and still be 50 times more efficient, which we are. So how do we get started in this? The Opportunity at Work, which is the social enterprise that I founded and lead, is leading this Tech Hire initiative. It's the first step. So Tech Hire, which is in 70 places right now, basically gives people who can do the job a chance to show it. And it also connects that entry point, this validated hiring entry point, to the entire infrastructure locally of training, of guidance, and so forth, so you can get feedback and then you can go at it again. So nobody fails here. You're not ready yet, but here's what you need to do to get ready. And so far, over 4,000 people have gotten jobs this way, people who otherwise would not have. So GE Digital's been doing this in Rhode Island. They've hired a third of their iOS developers, sorry, actually their IoT developers, their Internet of Things developers, front-end developers from this, and a lot of trained, a lot of employers in here, as you can see, 72 places. Now, what we're learning is there's a tremendous amount of value that, first of all, just to let people get in and sign up. So this is techhire.careers, and you can sign up. The opening screen says, for the individual, says, get hired, make bank. That's what people want. People don't want the theory. They want a chance to show it. They want to earn more. But if they can demonstrate it, they get into a pool, and they've got a shot. So the way they do it, the way we validate them, is, first of all, you apply. Second, there's a technical assessment of some sort. Now, it might be, we worked with HackerRank and with Amazon and Pinterest and a number of others to develop a software developer assessment where you turn it on its side. If HackerRank is like who's first, second, third, fourth, fifth, we want to turn it on its side. Who can do it at this level, period? It's more like are you at that level? Our point is not who's best or second best, because like you want to hire them all in the end. But we do that. And then this soft skills behavioral assessment, this is where it gets really interesting. We have the companies that participate, if they're doing it, they've committed to interview to hire and hire, apprentice to hire these people from these pools. Those who are actually doing it, and there's hundreds of them, there really are, as a benefit to them, they can offer this volunteer opportunity. The people who would be hiring you in their company, they can volunteer to do mock interviews with our candidates. And I say it's a benefit to the company because it really is. It's like an incredible experience. People love it. They start, they say, oh, I'll do one a month, and then they come back after the first one and say, can I do one a week? And do you have any tools for me to be better at this? It's an amazing experience because it's 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, you can take your skills, your mastery, and change the trajectory of another human being's life. So over Skype, 20-minute interview, 10-minute feedback. Very important. So the person's gotten an interview, like a credible person who knows what you do. They are, if they're ready, they're validated into the pool, and they are going to be hired because there's hundreds of employers wanting to hire them. If they're not ready, they get feedback, which you don't get in a job interview, right? Because this is not a job interview, this is a mock interview, so there's no legal issues of giving you feedback. But it is an incredible experience. People who've applied for so many jobs, so many ways, never gotten any feedback. It could be a really simple thing. You're using too many buzzwords here, just say what you can do. Really simple things can make a huge difference for people. Or they have real skills gaps, in which case there are resources to do that. And we don't just drop them there, we take them to the next step of how to get there. Okay, and then finally they get in the pool, employers review them, and so far, as I said, we've had 4,100 hired. The volunteer impact is a huge deal. This feedback matters a lot, and those volunteers, by the way, I mean, remember, there are people in their company who are hiring, they become huge champions within the company, and they find, you get a network, you know, like 300,000 software developers built Linux, right, in this sort of, in the server space. Like, and they really like won huge market share, nobody getting paid, all volunteers. We have an ability to get volunteers to do this validated hiring at huge scale. We can't actually provide, we haven't yet been able to provide enough people, enough candidates for the interest in doing this. It's amazing. And for the employers, it's the classic things, you know, you fill roles more easily, it's hundreds of dollars a day in opportunity cost, you know, you improve retention, we think. We're getting feedback, we'll see if we can prove that out. And diversity is a big factor for a lot of employers. And this is just an example from Rhode Island, which is a state we've gone pretty deep in. About 180 employers are involved in this thing, and there's a lot of talent out there. We haven't run out of it yet. So our leadership team here, we have actually Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, Greylock Partners, chair of our board, Anne-Marie Slaughter, who both, from different angles, obviously, are very deep in this space. There's a lot of excitement about, you know, how we can actually, if you read some of Reid's stuff on blitz scaling and how do you actually kind of create this multi-sided marketplace, that's the play we're running. And then some of our leaders there, we're about 25 staff right now, but we have hundreds of people working in the communities and companies and elsewhere to make this work. So we want everybody to join us because what we are doing, we're not building an organization that can rewire the labor market. I hope if you got the impression that we were going to personally get 1 million people jobs, I want to disabuse you, because what we are doing is we are building a capacity for this country to solve this problem. And the capacity is there, but we need the connective tissue. So what you can do, first of all, on hiring practices, become part of this network, this Opportunity Works network, you know, techhire.careers, and actually, it'd be something like a talent cooperative of employers. Something like, think about the College Board, what that did for access to college when it was formed in the 1930s, where suddenly, you know, the salutatorian of Dubuque Township High School, you had a way of knowing, could they get into Dartmouth? Because you never had that before. And then the communities coming together to really plug into this. A lot of times communities might be spending money on training that employers don't care about. But boy, if you shifted those training dollars to wraparound services that helped people as they were going through the training that employers did care about and that you knew they could get a job proximately, make a huge difference. And then this talent financing, this talent equity fund, we're pooling capital to essentially have a pay-it-forward fund. So instead of putting all the risk on the individual, as we do now, who's an N of one, who has no predictive analytics, who has no diversification of their own risk, instead to have it in the system. And you know, there's risk sharing by the educational institution, and then the payoff by the employer. So what's at stake? I think I used to spend a lot of time on what's at stake. I think people get it now because there's a lot of things that are not working. So I want to emphasize instead the question of, can we change at this scale? And I want to assert not only that we can change at this scale, but that we already have. The chart you're looking at plots high school attendance by American teenagers from 1910 to 1940. In that and it's from Claudia Golden and Larry Katz's book. So in that 30-year period, we went from 9% of American teenagers going to high school to 79% of American teenagers going to high school. And it had all the buzzwords before we had even invented the buzzwords. It was viral, it was capital light, it was a model, right? There was a high school, the American high school, which was Exeter minus Greek and Latin and plus animal husbandry and home economics. And there was a demand signal. There were employers in the new industries, right, in the auto factories and the telegraph offices saying, we want someone with a high school degree, right? And how did you do it? Well, you could read about it in the Farmer's Almanac, or you could read about it in Ladies' Home Journal, and you could call a town meeting and say, hey, we're going to start a school district. You would vote, we're going to have a school district. We're going to elect 5 of our neighbors as school board. Oh yeah, but how do you pay for it? Well, you do a local property tax, and if you can't afford the tax, you help build the school, because we want that, right? We want our kids. And remember, when you hear about how the world is changing so fast, unprecedented change, there was a 30, 40, 50-year period where you went from about 2/3 of Americans working in agriculture to about 15% working in agriculture. More than half of the workforce was displaced from a single industry in slightly over a generation. That was a much more dramatic change. But what was our response to that? Our response was the high school movement. Our response was, across the country, we got 30,000 high schools in a 30-year period with no Department of Education, right? No one in charge. So we absolutely can do this. We need a lifelong learning and earning movement now. When people talk about the volatility of jobs, that's a feature, but that's not fate, right? We absolutely can create a system that can train people. And we're not going to do it probably in the German way of a full apprenticeship system, although apprentices, I think, have a very, apprenticeships have a very valuable role. I think we're going to do it in an American way. I think we're going to do it with data. I think we're going to do it with community. And I think that everyone in this room, and I think that most people in the country actually have something to contribute to it. And I will end this with something I should have known, I should have really understood, but I have discovered doing this work, is that our answer's not in the algorithm. Algorithms matter a lot. You know, the data graph matters a lot to get the right people connected to the right people at the right time. But in fact, where we've seen the enormous power is in the human connection scaled up, right place, right time. I said half the labor market, this doesn't work for 80 million people. Well, the other half it does, 80 million people. And the way it does for those who it works for is they have mentors, they have coaches, they have people they can talk to, they get to practice their interviews before they actually go do them, right? All of these things. And we can make that happen for everyone. And the reason we call it a demand-demand economy is wherever we've got this going, employers are getting something they really want. Individuals are getting something they really want. The politicians are getting something they really want, people in good jobs. And it turns out that everybody pitching in is getting something they really want. Because some people have a lot of money, but everybody wants more money, but everybody wants more meaning too. And I would just urge you to get involved in this. You can go to techhire.org or Opportunity at Work and become part of this movement. Thank you.